Ethan had lived most of his 36 years fighting uphill battles. He was a single father, raising his daughter Lily after her mother had walked away when the child was only a toddler. Every day began before dawn, his alarm ringing in a small apartment where the rent always felt too high. He worked with his hands, fixing cars, patching roofs, and taking whatever odd jobs he could find. His palms were rough, his boots worn thin, but he carried himself with quiet determination. For Lily, he promised himself, he would never quit no matter how heavy the load. That afternoon, the sky was grey with a chill that warned of early autumn. Ethan and Lily were driving home from a long day, the back seat filled with second-hand groceries he had bought on discount. As they turned onto a quiet country road, Ethan spotted a rusty red pickup pulled over on the shoulder. Its hood was up, steam curling into the cool air, and beside it stood a woman in her late 60s. Her shoulders were stiff, her face worried, though she held herself with the strength of someone who had endured far more than a broken engine. Without thinking twice, Ethan pulled over. Lily looked up from the picture book in her lap. "Dad, are we stopping again?" she asked, her tone half curious, half impatient. Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. "Someone needs help, honey. That's what we do." He parked behind the pickup, grabbed his old toolbox from the trunk, and walked toward the woman. She looked surprised but relieved to see him. "Truck won't start," she explained, her voice steady but tired. "Been sitting here an hour, and not a single soul stopped." Ethan only nodded, leaning under the hood to study the problem. The engine was old, worn down from years of work, but Ethan's hands moved confidently. He checked the hoses, cleaned a clogged filter, and patched a frayed wire with tape he carried just in case. Lily climbed out of their car and sat on the pickup's tailgate, watching her father with admiration. "He always fixes things," she told the woman proudly. Ethan glanced at her and chuckled. "Sometimes," he said, wiping grease from his brow. After an hour of sweat and effort, he managed to get the truck coughing back to life. The woman's eyes softened with gratitude, a look that seemed to carry unspoken stories. "You didn't have to stop," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged as though it were nothing. "I know what it's like to be stuck," he answered. "We take care of each other." His words were simple, but they hung in the air with weight. The woman introduced herself as Margaret, though Ethan only nodded politely. She asked if he would follow her home, just in case the truck failed again. Ethan hesitated, thinking of the evening ahead. Dinner to cook, laundry piled up, bills waiting on the kitchen table, but something in Margaret's voice made him agree. With Lily yawning in the back seat, he followed her down the winding country road. When they arrived, Ethan was unprepared for what he saw. Beyond the gravel driveway stretched acres of farmland, rolling fields kissed by the setting sun. Barns stood tall, though weathered, and fences lined pastures that seemed to go on forever. Margaret's truck might have been rusty, but her land whispered of history and hidden worth. Ethan parked, staring with quiet wonder. He wasn't used to such wide-open spaces. His life had been small apartments and rented rooms. Margaret noticed his surprise, but said nothing, only inviting him and Lily into her farmhouse for supper. The inside of the house felt like stepping back in time. Wooden beams lined the ceiling, and the air smelled of baked bread and warm stew. Family photographs covered the walls, men and women with sunburned faces, children holding lambs, and black and white portraits of ancestors who had built this place with their hands. Ethan sat uncomfortably at the wooden table, not used to being treated as a guest. Lily, however, was delighted, her small eyes wide, as Margaret placed a bowl of stew in front of her. The old woman smiled as she watched the child eat, laughter bubbling up when Lily complimented the bread. As they ate, Ethan noticed Margaret's gaze often drifting toward Lily, a softness in her expression that seemed almost maternal. She asked questions about school, about what Lily liked to draw, about Ethan's work. Ethan answered cautiously, not one to share much about his struggles, but Margaret listened with an attentiveness that unsettled him. He had only stopped to help with a broken truck, yet somehow the evening was pulling him into a story that felt larger than himself. When the meal ended, Margaret insisted he take some bread home. Ethan declined, but Lily's pleading eyes made him accept. Outside, as they walked back to their car, Ethan paused to glance across the farmland once more. The setting sun painted the fields gold, and for a brief second he imagined Lily running through them, free and happy, without the constant shadow of struggle. He shook the thought away, reminding himself that dreams like that didn't belong to men like him. Still, as he buckled Lily into the car and started the engine, a quiet feeling settled over him, the kind of feeling that whispered he had just stepped into the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. The next morning, Ethan returned to his routine, rising before the sun and slipping quietly into the kitchen to pack Lily's lunch. The smell of bread Margaret had given them still lingered in the apartment, filling the small space with an unusual warmth. As he set the bread on the table, he found himself remembering her eyes, steady and thoughtful, watching him the night before. He shook off the thought and went about his day, repairing an old sedan in his neighbor's driveway and hauling boxes for a delivery job. But every so often, the image of those rolling fields crept into his mind, tugging at something he couldn't name. 2 days later, as he was picking Lily up from school, he saw the rusty pickup waiting near the curb. Margaret leaned against it, her arms crossed, her expression calm but purposeful. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said when Ethan approached. "I wanted to thank you properly." Ethan frowned, surprised. "You already did," he answered, glancing at Lily, who waved shyly at Margaret. But Margaret wasn't satisfied. She asked if they would visit again, just for supper. Ethan hesitated, pride warring with politeness, but Lily's hopeful face made the choice for him. They followed her truck once more down the winding country road. That evening, the conversation shifted. Margaret asked about Ethan's dreams, not just his work. Her eyes sharpened when he deflected with humor. "I don't have time for dreams," he muttered. "I have Lily and bills, and that's enough." Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying him with a patience that made him uneasy. Finally, she said, "Sometimes people spend so long surviving, they forget they're allowed to live." The words unsettled him, not because they weren't true, but because they struck too close to the bone. Lily, oblivious, played on the floor with a basket of wooden toys Margaret had brought out from some old chest. Over the next few weeks, Ethan found reasons, small and practical, to stop by Margaret's farm. Sometimes it was to check the truck, sometimes to fix a creaky door, sometimes just to bring Lily out of the city for fresh air. Slowly, the farm became familiar, its vastness no longer intimidating but oddly comforting. Margaret seemed to watch him more closely each time, her questions gently peeling back layers he hadn't realized he still carried. One evening, as they walked the fields at sunset, she finally spoke what had been building all along. "This land," she said softly, sweeping her hand across the horizon, "has been in my family for generations. But I'm alone now. My children, they wanted nothing to do with it. They left for the city years ago and never came back." Her voice trembled only slightly. "I don't have anyone to leave it to." Ethan stopped walking, his heart thudding. "I'm sorry," he said carefully, not understanding where she was leading. Margaret looked at him then, her gaze steady, almost daring. "What if I told you I wanted you and Lily to have it?" The air felt heavier, the sky suddenly too vast. Ethan stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice rough. Margaret smiled, not kindly but knowingly. "I've watched you, Ethan. You're honest, you work hard, you give your daughter everything you can. This land needs someone like you, someone who'll care for it, not sell it off. I don't need money. I need to know it's in the hands of people who understand struggle, who'll respect it." Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed. "You don't even know me." Margaret's eyes softened. "I know enough." That night, Ethan lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. The offer swirled in his mind, impossible yet real. He thought of the farm, the golden fields, the chance for Lily to grow up running free instead of counting every penny. But he also thought of responsibility, of mortgages, of repairs, of how easily everything could go wrong. He had spent so long surviving that the idea of being given something so vast, so life-altering, felt like a trap. He almost convinced himself to forget it entirely. The next weekend, however, Lily made the choice for him. She tugged at his sleeve, her little voice insistent. "Dad, can we go back to Margaret's? I like it there. It feels happy." Ethan looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Hope, pure and unburdened. That was enough. They drove back, and Margaret was waiting on the porch, as if she had known he would come. Over coffee at the worn kitchen table, Margaret laid it out plainly. She would arrange the paperwork, she said. Ethan and Lily would move into the farmhouse. The land would be theirs to tend, theirs to protect. Ethan sat in silence, struggling with disbelief, with fear of the unknown. Finally he whispered, "Why us?" Margaret reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. "Because kindness deserves a legacy, and you've already proven you'd never turn your back on someone in need. That's what this farm requires." Tears burned at the edges of Ethan's eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. He thought of that night on the roadside, of how he'd stopped without hesitation, never imagining it would lead here. Life had never given him anything freely, and yet now it seemed to be handing him everything he had ever silently wished for. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to breathe deeply, to imagine a future not defined by struggle, but by possibility. Lily ran out to the porch, her laughter carrying across the fields, and Ethan knew the decision had already been made.